camera, so it's a little bit different angle, so I apologize. My name's Mark. I work for BikeWalkKC. I also have experience in the bike industry as a professional mechanic for a number of years before I found my calling at BikeWalk, where I actually get to teach and share my passion with folks instead of just wrenching on bikes. So we're going to do some real kind of basic overview on things real quick. I'm not going to labor on too long, but I just want to make sure everyone understands some basic vocabulary in case I say something that you might not know what it is. So first vocabulary I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over real quick the parts of a bike just so that everybody can speak on the same level. Parts of a bike, there are some specifics here. So I'm going to start with the frame members, right? So this is my little bike. And so the frame, I want to speak about each individual tube. We're going to start with the one here on the top is the top tube. This one going down is the down tube. This here is the seat tube. Those are pretty obvious. The fork. The fork has a part that goes through that the stem attaches to. That's called the steer tube, the part you can't see of the fork. This little tube up here that the fork runs, the steer tube runs through, this is called the head tube. So head tube, top tube, down tube, seat tube. Now these tubes that go down to the rear wheel, they're actually referred to as stays. So you have seat stays, and you have chain stays, okay? All right, then you got the stem that attaches to the steer tube of the fork. This is the stem. It's not very good, it's black, not very visible. And then the handlebars on the top. Saddle, and in the bike industry, we refer to the seat as the saddle, but then why do we call it a seat post? I don't know. That's a question, but so saddle, and then you have seat post that enters into the seat tube. Great. Rear derailleur, if you can see this, the rear derailleur is what the chain runs through. It allows you to shift the, well, you shift the gears with the shifter, but it actually moves the chain onto the different cog in the back. This cluster of gears in the back, each individual gear would be called a cog. But the cluster of them in total would be either called a cassette or a freewheel, depending on the style. But for this purpose, I'm going to refer to it as a cassette. So a cassette is the collection of all the cogs put together. Front derailleur is mounted here on the seat tube. Chain runs through it, and it allows you to move the chain onto the different chain rings. Each of these gears on the front, they're referred to as a chain ring. The collection of chain rings and the crank arm is referred to as the crank set. So chain rings with the crank arm, both sides, is called the crank set. Pedal. All right. The wheel. The wheel is the entire assembly. The wheel is made up of the rim, the spokes, the hub at the center, and the nipples that attach the spokes to the rim. But the entire assembly is referred to as the wheel, tire, and then tube inside of the tire. We have brakes in the rear, and we have brakes in the front. We'll talk more about brakes here a little bit later. Brake levers. This is a flat bar mountain bike, so your brake levers look like that. If you have a road bike, your brake levers will look a little bit different. And then the shifters on this bike are underneath. You may have friction shifters that you just operate with your thumb. They'd sit on top, but that's your shifters. All right, so that's the parts of a bike. Let's talk about some specifics about bikes, and this is the Maintain Your Ride program. So we're talking about maintenance and possibly fixing your bike. So I want you all to know that in the bike industry, All fasteners on a bicycle are metric. So if you want to do any work on your bike, you need Allen wrenches maybe, or the also called hex wrenches. This is a selection of just a couple key. This is like a 6, a 5, and a 4 millimeter, but they are metric Allen wrenches. Any style you have can work. I have some professional Allen wrenches that, you know, look like this. They call them P handles because it looks like a P, I guess. But anything you have will work, but they are metric. If you have a bicycle that has bolt-on axles, front or rear, where there's actually a bolt that you can use an adjustable wrench, or typically they are a 15 millimeter. So I always keep a 15 millimeter combination wrench around so that I can take wheels out using the bolt-on axles. Some other specific bike tools that may be out there. This is a pedal wrench. It is very thin. It is 15 millimeters, and it allows you to get in between the pedal and the crank arm. If you've ever tried to take pedals off using just a standard adjustable wrench, usually it's too wide to get in between the pedal and the crank arm, and you have some difficulties. That's why they make specific pedal wrenches. So those are bike-specific tools. Another bike-specific tool that you should have is a tire lever. We'll get into more about tire levers here later. But there are two ends to the tire lever. There's the spoon end, I would call it. It's kind of rounded. And then there's the hook end. All right, so I always keep a couple tire levers handy if I'm changing a tire. Keep one in my saddlebag just in case I need one. And we'll show you how to use tire levers here in a little bit. But those are some bike-specific tools. If you are going to go out and get yourself a little multi-tool to carry with you, there's a few options here. This is a pretty simple one. It has 5 tools on it. Try to open them up. It has a 6, a 5, and a 4 millimeter hex wrench. And then it has a straight and a Phillips head. Very simple multi-tool. And you can get a little more elaborate multi-tool. It has probably like 20 different tools on it, a little chain tool and whatnot. And then there's this big beast of a thing that is really too big for me to carry with me, but it's got all kinds of tools, chain breaker tool. It's even got little wrenches on them. So lots of different options for tools, but remember they are the metric. Anything you're going to do on your bike is a metric tool.
And if I could jump in, if you're riding a lot, it's a really good idea to just maybe invest in like at least a multi-tool to carry with you, especially if you're doing long distance riding. But if you don't have the means to have those tools, this panel today is, sponsored by the Johnson County Library, and they have a fix-it stand outside of their main branch that has all of those tools too. So if you don't have those tools, you could access them there too. And there's also one of those stands in Midtown too, in front of the 816 Bicycle Collective. So
yeah, they're putting those stands up in quite a few places.
Yeah, they're on trails all around. Yeah. So
yeah, trailheads. So good. All right. Let's get into the actual maintenance component of this. So when we teach about bicycle maintenance, a lot of the times we go in and we work with kids. Let me adjust this camera here so we can see what I'm doing. All right. So when we go into schools and we teach kids about bicycle maintenance, we give them a really easy way to think about checking their bike to make sure it's safe to ride. We teach them to do this every time they ride their bike. And it works for adults also. I do it every time I ride my bike. Maybe not as elaborately as I'm going to teach you here, but we call it the ABC Quick Check. ABC Quick Check, 5 parts to it. So the A is anything to do with the air, anything to do with the tires. So we want to just check to make sure your tires have air in them, right? You can use a pump to check them. If you have bigger kind of high volume mountain bike tires, you can really just kind of squeeze them. You don't really need to put a pump on them. If you have a road bike with some skinnier, high pressure tires, a pump might be necessary for you to verify the pressure. So we want to make sure that the bicycle has, the tires have air in them, they're not flat. Tires are in good shape, they're not bald, or they're not dry rotted, they're not falling apart on you. Just make sure that your tires are safe. So A. B is we want to check the brakes. We want to make sure the brakes are working before we jump on the bike and scream down the local hill. So we just teach that we want to grab both brake levers and you just rock the bike back and forth real quick. And that's an easy way to see if your brakes are working. All right. If the wheels pop up, then the brakes are holding the opposite wheel and allowing you to pull it up. We'll get into more about specific brake pads here in a little bit. A, B, C. C has to do with anything with the chain. So we want to make sure that the drivetrain is functioning. The chain is in place. It's not bound up. It's not off. It's not rusted to the point where it won't flex. So we just teach to spin the pedals backwards, kind of look at it, observe it, listen to it, make sure it's running through the system properly. Okay. So A, B, C. The quick has to do with the quick release. We want to make sure that if you have, I apologize, I have two dogs and somebody just came home. They're looking. All right. Now we get through that. Okay, quick release. So if you can see this, quick release, I have quick releases on the front wheel and the rear wheel. I'm going to make sure that the quick release is closed, not open. We'll get into quick releases a little bit closer here later, but we just want to check to make sure the quick releases are closed. You don't want to ride down the street, go over a bump, your quick release is open and your front wheel come out. And then the last part is to check yourself before you wreck yourself, is what we teach. And it has to do with like helmets or your pant leg, make sure nothing's getting caught in the bicycle. So let me put this away, and now we're going to get into some more in-depth of each one of those letters. All right, A. A lot of people want to know how to fix a flat, how to change a tire. I'm going to go a little bit deeper than just that. I want you to understand what you're looking for on a tire and a tube. So here's a demonstration of a tire that has some information printed on the side of it. It has the size of the tire. It also has an air pressure range that you need to look at. I hope you guys can see that. This tire is a 26-inch by 1.5 inches wide. That's the width is 1.5, 26 is the diameter of the tire. So if you need to replace the tire, you need to know what size tire you're trying to find to replace. Also, if you're looking to replace the tube inside your tire, you need to make sure you get the tube that fits the tire that you're going to stick it in. So that's how we know. Every tire should be either printed like this, or it should be kind of like embossed into the side of the tire, what the size, what the pressure is. Also, you see that the pressure on here is 45 to 65, I believe. Is that what it says? Or 45 to 85? 45 to 85 PSI. We'll talk more about pressure range when we fill this thing up. Okay, let's get into a tire changing demonstration. First thing I have to do is, for this demonstration, I need to make sure it's flat, because, right, you don't want to ever change a tire unless there's a problem with it. So
the 10 people who did the poll, it looks like we have a few pros, a few people who could use a refresher, and a handful, or one person who said they have no idea, just so you know.
No idea how to change a tire?
Yes. So we've got a nice.
Okay. So for you pros, I'm sorry, but everyone needs to know how to change a tire. And for this demonstration, I'm going to use tire levers. And I'm going to show you how to use them properly. All right, so this is a flat tire. All right, I'm going to use my tire lever. I'm going to use 2 tire levers in this demonstration. If you get really good at this, you can sometimes do it without a tire lever. But I've learned to not try to teach people how to go without a tire lever until they get real comfortable using the tire lever. All right, spoon end, hook end. I'm gonna start with the spoon end. And I'm gonna stick it underneath the bead of the tire, and I'm just gonna pry that off the side of the rim, and then hook that tire lever on that spoke, just like that. Okay, this is why you need two, because now I'm gonna take my other tire lever, I'm gonna take that spoon end, I'm gonna stick it in the gap that I've just created, and I'm gonna draw it towards me. And this is a very good demonstration of, I've never taken this tire off of this rim before. That is on there tight. Okay. There we go. I just kept drawing that towards me until I pried that tire off of the rim. And once it's loose enough, hope you guys can see this. I apologize if I'm in a bad spot here. Once it's loose enough, you can pull that tire all the way off of that rim. Just on one side though, okay? I'm gonna leave the other side of the tire still on the rim. This just allows me to get in and get that tube out. And there's a tube. Now we didn't talk about tubes yet, but since I had this out, let's talk about them just a little bit. This tube is this is what we call a Schrader valve. This is a kind of a standard valve, the same thing that's on your car tire. That's a Schrader valve. If you have kind of a higher end wheel and tire, maybe on a road bike, you might have a valve that looks like this. It's skinnier, okay? They work very much the same, but you need to know what kind of tube you're replacing. If you pull a Schrader valve, a Schrader tube out, you need to replace it with a Schrader tube. If you pull a Presta tube out, you need to replace it with a Presta tube. They are different size holes in the rim, so you need to make sure you get the right tube for that rim. Okay. If you have a flat tire, you need to assess why you have a flat tire. I do not want you to pull out this tube and just assume that it just went flat on its own for no reason and pop a brand new tube into your tire and there's something sharp sticking through the tire and you now puncture your brand new tube. So very carefully, just kind of feel around the inside of the tire, make sure there's nothing sticking through that would have caused your tube to be punctured and then deflate, okay? Once you're sure that you've got any obstructions out of there, the way to reinsert this tube, I always like to start at the valve hole. I kind of peel that tire away. You saw how I did that. I just kind of expose the valve hole in the rim. Poke that valve in. And I kind of tuck that tube up into the tire. If you're going with a brand new tube, just pull it out of the box. It's going to be very flat, much like this one I showed you. You might want to put just a little bit of air in it to give it some form, to give it some body. Okay, so I've got that tube kind of tucked up into the tire. Now I need to put the tire back on the rim. Again, I prefer to start at the valve. And I like to just work both sides at the same time. And I am just kind of using my thumb to pry that bead back onto the rim. until you get to the point where I can't do it by hand anymore. I need to use my tire lever. All right, so spoon end again, but I'm going to put it in kind of backwards this time. I'm going to put that spoon end just underneath the rim, the tire on the rim, and then I'm just going to pry it on. And I might need to use my second one on the other side. Just a little at a time, stick it underneath, catch the rim, and pry it on. Did everybody see that? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, some beads are easier than others. Like if you can do it without using a tire lever, it's preferred because you're less likely to pinch it, which means getting some of the tube in between that bead. We did have a question from Cindy saying that she doesn't really have the strength when you were taking it off, basically, how you were just doing it with one. I was wondering if you could quickly demo how you can use multiple tire levers sometimes to get more leverage if you don't have that arm strength.
Yeah, let's see. Let's try this again. This was a booger for me the first time, so let's see if I can.
Yeah, some are really easy to get off and some are really hard.
First thing I do whenever I'm trying to take a tire off is you'll see me kind of knead the tire all the way around, and I'm trying to break that tire off of the rim, and I want a rim has a valley in it. Right, just the profile of a rim, it has high shoulders and then a valley where the spoke holes are. And I want to get the bead of the tire, the edge of the tire, down into that valley. I want to all the way around. What that allows me to do is to get some slack on the opposite side. If that tire is sitting in the valley, then that gives me some room on the other side. Okay. Let's see if I can do this to get more leverage here. I'm going to pry that out and hook that on that spoke. I just grabbed this rim yesterday and threw this tire on it. This is a tight tire and rim combination. Okay. I just kind of it took a little effort there, if you could see that, but I let this tire lever do some of the work, holding it, and then I could push it away or pull it towards me and pry that tire off. And a lot of times, just practice makes a big difference. And then, yeah, you can put it on without, but it does take some hand strength to do it. All right. Let's talk about inflation. Not financial inflation, but pumping this up. So I have here a floor pump in my shop. Out on the road, you're not going to have one, but we'll just say you're at home and you have a floor pump. Put the pump head on the valve, and then I open this lever to kind of lock that pump head onto that valve. And then pressure range, right? So we have that 45 to 85 PSI range. And I want you to really think about where you personally fall in the range of, in the weight range of people, right? So if you are an average weight person, let's just say myself, I'm 190 pounds. I would probably pump this up to somewhere around 65 or 70 PSI. All right, a little higher than the middle. All right. If I was a 120 pound person, I'd probably pump it up to 50 PSI. You just don't need to pump it up all the way to its absolute max and make it rock hard. So if you're in the 200s, maybe go a little bit higher, but there's no reason to run it right at the very bottom. There's no reason to run it right at the very top of that pressure range. Somewhere in the middle, and then tailor it to your specific body type, okay? It'll be more comfortable. Lower pressure, it'll ride more comfortable, and it'll resist flats better, actually. It's kind of strange the way that works, but if the tire can flex, then it can mold around obstacles instead of things just puncturing right through them. So there you go. Close that little lever, pulled it off, and my tire is on. It's reinflated. Wow. All right. People had questions about fixing tubes. Haven't never demonstrated that, and I'm not going to go into the full demonstration about patching, but I'm going to show you a few tips. So here is a tube that had a hole in it at one point in time, and I put a patch on it. This is a permanent fix. This patch is now permanently attached to this tube. I may have done this a long time ago, and it still works just fine. You'll notice that it still has some plastic on the outside. The way patches come in a package, this is a little patch kit. It comes with some cement, okay? And then it comes with these patches. It also comes with some sandpaper. There's a piece of sandpaper, there's a patch. The foil is the liner that protects the adhesive, all right? Then there's this little plastic. And what that plastic does is it protects the sticky surface that is gonna be on the outside of this patch from sticking to the inside of the tire. All right, it gives a little anti-friction kind of membrane that allows the tube to move inside of the tire. So leave the plastic on. The thing about patching tubes is patience. I mean, it really, when they tell you to apply to scuff up, you're supposed to rub up the tube to scuff it up. Do that well, and then apply some glue and let it dry. Don't rush it. If you stick a patch on still wet cement, it's not gonna stick. So let the cement dry into a nice haze, and then peel that foil off the back of this patch, stick it on, and push down and get it attached, and it'll work. They also sell, this is a little simple pre-adhesive patch kit, okay? These are kind of a quick on the road, get yourself back going kind of patch kit, but they are not a permanent fix, okay? You get them on there, it'll get you off the road, it'll get you home, but you're gonna need to peel this thing off and permanently fix that tube, or it will let go on you. Another thing I'm going to tell you about, if you have to do something on the road, replacing a tube or patching a tube on the road, and if you use CO2s, if anybody has ever used a CO2 cartridge in order to reinflate their tire, when you get home, you need to deflate it and pump it up with a pump. The CO2 will leach out of that tube and it'll eventually go flat. So you'll fix your tire one day, the next day you'll go to look at your bike again and the tire will be flat and you'll wonder, oh gosh, what happened? Nothing happened, just the CO2 leached out. It's a smaller molecule. So just when you get home, deflate that tire and pump it up with a pump. Last thing about on the road, tire repairs. I'm going to show you a couple portable pumps that you might see. This is something typical that people will mount this thing on their bottle cage. It's a little portable pump. You'll open that little handle. It extends, right? Has a little lever just like a floor pump does. And these are fine. They're relatively inexpensive, okay? You can mount them to your bottle cage so they're kind of tucked out of the way. This is another option of a hand pump. This is the one that I would actually kind of recommend. Not this specific brand, but this style. Okay, what this thing does differently is this has tucked inside of it a hose. And this hose gets attached to the other side, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, you have a hose to attach. So as you're pumping, you have this hose that gets a little flexible. Instead of bending your valve stem with this as you're putting a lot of force against it. So if you have the option to get a new little hand pump, get one that has one of these hoses, flexible hose. You'll appreciate it if you go that route. Okay, what questions do we have about tires, fixing a flat, anything along those lines?
I was going to mention the whole thing with patching. You know, if you've never patched before, it's definitely a good idea to practice. Have a new tube and practice at home. Maybe not when you're on the side of the road, having all your friends waiting for you in a group ride situation, because it gets stressful, and that's when you're more likely to mess up the patch when you're rushing it. So practice patching at home or have a couple spares handy. The other question we had earlier on was about slime. I don't know if you even wanted to just mention quickly what that is.
We can mention slime.
The shop I used in New Mexico used it all the time, but I know it's not as common here.
Well, that's because you guys had thorns, a lot of thorn situations out there. Slime is also like, it's like a fix-a-flat type. It's a sealant or a liquidy kind of material that you put inside of the tube. And the idea is that if that tube gets punctured, that slime would kind of fill the hole and kind of repair it. The tube would kind of repair itself. I personally have not had any good luck with slime inside of a tube, personally. I do use, there's a method called tubeless, where on my mountain bikes and some of my other bikes I do not have tubes inside of my tires. And I do use a sealant material. It's a liquid material that is inside of the tires that if there's a puncture, it'll fill that hole and clog the hole. But I've never had any luck putting it inside of the tubes themselves. It just becomes a bit of a mess. If I'm running tubes, if I get a flat, I will just replace that tube, take the punctured tube, stick it in my pocket. When I get home, I'll fix it and then stick it in my bag. But I don't put slime or anything inside of my tubes. And then
Mike had raised his hand, but Mike, if we haven't answered your question yet, just type it to me in the Q&A or put it in the chat feature here, and then we'll just move along.
Okay, cool. Anybody else have any specific questions? We can try to catch them later, but I want to make sure I get through everything without sitting too long on one subject. Last thing I'm going to say about patch kits. I always carry a patch kit with me in my saddlebag. A tube, a patch kit, a multi-tool. I will say if you do the same, and if you've ever cracked open one of these tubes of glue, like this is a brand new one. I don't know if you could see that, but I haven't punctured the hole in this thing yet. If I punctured a hole in this and I used it to patch a tube, then I stuck it back in my patch kit and then never opened that patch kit for like a year, I'll bet you that tube of glue is dried up. I've had it happen to me. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I go to fix a tube, I crack open my case, and my glue is dried up, and basically I have to call for a ride. So if you crack open one of those tubes and then you haven't used it again for a long time, check it, make sure it's still liquid before you go out and trust your life on it. Not life, but you know what I mean. All right, let's talk about brakes. Brake pads and different kinds of brakes real quick. I'm going to show you a few different types of brakes. Depending on what kind of bicycle you are riding, you're going to have different brakes. If you're riding a road bike, you're going to have a brake that looks kind of like this. It attaches to your fork or to the brake bridge on your seat stays. You pull on the cable and it closes the pads like that onto the rim. If you have a mountain bike, a hybrid, you might have something that looks like this. These are called V brakes, okay? I guess when they open up, they look like a V. I guess that's where that comes from. They have this cradle here. The cable goes across it and attaches to this binding bolt over here. These are V-brakes. These are really nice, good stopping power. The good stopping power. I like V-brakes. They're easy to adjust. On my bicycle that I have in my stand, I have something called cantilever brakes. See if I can get it up here where you guys can see it. These are cantilever brakes. They look kind of like a V-brake. Man, this is a horrible angle. But there is like a straddle cable that goes between. This is bad. I should never have done that. I really wish I had my camera going. Anyway, those are cantilever brakes. The other thing you might be seeing becoming more common, disc brakes. This is a disc brake caliper. A rotor will go into that little slot right there. And as you pull cable, you'll pinch the pads together. It's very much like a miniaturized automotive disc brake system. All right. This is another disc brake. This is hydraulic. This will take hydraulic fluid, very much like an automotive application, to operate the pistons. So those are types of brakes. But they all kind of work on the same principle, right? You're going to have some sort of rotating material, and then you're going to use some sort of a pad that's going to squeeze against that rotating material to slow it down, create a bunch of friction. Okay, on a disc brake, you'll have a disc, a rotor that goes through the caliper. On a rim brake setup, you're going to have the rim. The rim is going to have a braking surface that the pads are going to pinch against. So here are some different kinds of brake pads. Okay. All right. Here is a new mountain style brake pad. It's got these nice little cuts in the side here. Those cuts serve a couple purposes. They are wear indicators, first of all. So when you use this thing and you wear down the pad, those cuts will go away. And when you don't see those cuts anymore, that means the pad is pretty much worn out. Like this one here, you'll see that the cuts are gone. This pad is pretty much worn out. The other thing these do is as they wear down, these little cuts allow the material to have a place to go. So anyway, that's a fresh brake pad. That is a that is a worn down brake pad. All right. So if you're checking your pads and you can't see those cuts, that pad needs to be replaced. Another thing you need to look for. Well, I'll show you something else here real quick. This is a worn out brake pad. This is another brake pad that looks similar. Okay. The difference is on this, you have to replace the entire assembly. On this is a cartridge style. This is a metal kind of shoe. Ooh, is that right? Is that what that's called? I'm losing it. This is metal. It stays on your bike, and then the brake pad just slides out, and you replace just the little pad itself, not the entire assembly. Okay, this is a cartridge style, but they would work on the same bike. Another thing you need to look for when you're looking at brake pads to make sure that they're good. Excuse me. If you see on this brake pad, you see all the little metal, all the little shards of metal that are in there. If you see all that kind of stuff in your brake pad, take some sort of a dental pick or something and pick all that out of there. If you continue to engage that brake pad into your braking surface, you're going to tear up your braking surface and create big gouges in your rim, ruin your rim. So if you have debris, it's natural to have it. It gets picked up from all over the place. Just chip that stuff out of there. And then the other thing you'll see about this brake pad itself, I don't know if you guys can catch it in the camera, but it's kind of glazed over a little bit. It's gotten kind of hard. So you could take a piece of sandpaper and just kind of buff that up and refresh that rubber, make it a little softer. Right now it's kind of glazed and kind of hard. It's not going to work very well. So you can fresh up a brake pad with a little bit of sandpaper and just getting all that metal out of it. So that's rim brake type brake pads. Here is a disc brake pad setup. Here are 2 brake pads for a disc brake setup. What you have is a pad and this little return spring, or it assists in the return of the brake pads. Here's the other pad. Now, the way you know whether these are worn out is you have to kind of measure the thickness of the pad. But this little spring, if your pad gets down to the same thickness as that little spring, then your pad's worn out. All right, I don't know if you can see that on the screen there, but that spring should sit below the pad so that the pad engages the rotor and the spring doesn't touch. Okay, if you have to replace disc brake pads, you need to know what the model number of the disc brake is, or you can just take the old pads in and make sure you replace pretty much exactly the same thing. Not all disc brake pads will work in the different disc brake systems. Okay, those are disc brake pads. Let's talk about brake adjustments. If you are riding a road bicycle, you have this type of brake right here on the top. This is a barrel adjuster is what we call this. Okay, this is how you will adjust the pull of your cable and make it either tighter or looser. All right, you can just screw this thing out, and then this is a little lock nut that you would rotate down to keep it from rotating on its own. But on a road bike system, you can adjust your cable pull and the tension using your barrel adjuster, which is located on the actual brake. If you are riding a disc brake, cable actuated disc brake, you do not have a barrel adjuster on the caliper. Or if you're riding a V-brake setup, you do not have a barrel adjuster here either. The barrel adjuster will be located on the brake lever itself. Here's your barrel adjuster right there. So if you need to adjust cable pull, if your brakes are getting real sloppy where you're pulling the lever and it's coming all the way to the handlebars, you need to add a little bit of tension, which means screw the barrel adjuster out to add some tension. I prefer that my levers on both sides, front and back, they pull the same. They pull the same distance and they pull the same, they feel the same. So you can make those adjustments right there. This little screw right here, if you can see it on this brake lever, that is a reach adjustment screw. If I screw that in, it will pull the lever a little bit closer. So if you have small hands, you can adjust where that lever is by screwing that little screw in. Some road bike brake levers will have a similar setup. Okay, now on V-brakes, let's talk about brake adjustments and making the brakes, because the brakes need to spring in at the same rate so that the pads touch the rim at the same time. I need to set up a demonstration, so give me just a second and I'll set up something we can demonstrate that on.
Yeah, while you're doing that, someone had mentioned that just talking about, are disc brakes better than rim brakes, and I mean, I don't know your feeling on that, Mark, but as a mechanic, I mean, I think there's good and bad to both. People have their preferences, and you're definitely seeing disc brakes more and more these days. But most of the bikes I work on are. Sorry, go ahead.
I believe that disc brakes are a better system. They have more braking power. They are not affected by weather as much. I like disc brakes, but I know how to work on them. For your average person, disc brakes can be a little problematic because you have to be a little careful with them. So I don't really know how to answer that question.
Yeah, everyone has their preferences, so, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I really can't get a good angle on this. and I apologize. My other camera would have been much better. See if I can set that up just perfectly so you guys can see. These are V-brakes. As I pull them, you can see both arms are springing in at the same rate, ideally, so that both brake pads are touching, the brake pads are touching each side of the rim at the exact same time. If you're having problems where one arm is springing more than the other, or one arm is, just being a little sluggish. So these are V-brakes, okay? And I'm gonna show you the mechanism with which to affect that. This little screw right here, if you can see, affects the spring rate. So if you have an arm that is springing a lot, you can dial this screw out and it will change how much it springs. If you have an arm that is not springing at all, it's just not moving much, you can maybe dial that screw in and affect it to spring it more. So that's how you adjust the spring of these V-brakes, is with those little screws. So that's pretty much that's pretty much brake adjustment. If you have a disc brake system, if it's a cable actuated disc brake system, you may have a couple adjustments here. You have an inboard pad alignment adjustment, and then you'll have an outboard pad alignment adjustment there. Let's see, what else can we show you? Apologize. All right, so pads. You want the pads to touch the rim parallel to the rim. You don't want the pads just like one corner of a pad to touch. So that's affected if you have a mountain bike style pad like this. Like this. You have all these different little washers on here. They're cone-shaped washers that allow you to adjust the angle of this pad. So the way you do that is you would take this pad, you would put it up against the rim, and you would, I don't know if you guys can see that I can adjust the angle of that pad. So I would stick it up against the rim, engage the brake lever to kind of hold it in place, align it properly, and then tighten it down. Okay. All right, any questions on brakes?
I'm not seeing anything though. Please feel free to go ahead and ask them. We're at 12:55, just so you know, Mark. But we can go ahead and go in, keep rolling along, and then I can feel any questions.
Trying to get the chains. Chains are a huge thing that everybody wants to know about. How do I check my chain? How do I take care of my chain? How do I lube my chain, clean my chain? I want to make sure we get into that. So, chains. Here's my speech. Chains are like the cheapest maintenance item you can do for your drivetrain. If you change out your chain on time, you will save the rest of your drivetrain. Okay. If you choose to ride a chain beyond its lifespan, you will start to tear up the rest of your drivetrain, and that gets expensive. So here is an old chain that this is difficult for you guys to see, but I can bend it, not the way that it's supposed to bend. I can bend it into a U, and you can see all the sides. This chain is worn out. If it's that flexible sideways, the chain is worn out. There's another way to check this chain. There's an official chain checker tool. All right. Not everybody's going to have one of these, but this is how you check a chain. You will stick this hook in one of the links when it's on the bike, obviously. And then if this little finger goes in that chain, the chain's worn out. This should be a real simple go, no go type measurement. If the finger goes in, finger goes in, this chain is toast, okay? The finger doesn't go in, your chain is still good. At home, you can use a ruler. If you have a good, precise 12-inch ruler, you can measure a chain precisely. If you put the end of the ruler, sorry, I gotta put it the right way. End of the ruler on a pin, you go exactly 12 inches, it should fall at the head of another pin. If it doesn't, then your chain is stretched, right? So you can check it at home using a very precise ruler. Don't use one of those little plastic rulers that you throw in your kid's school bag because they'll never be precise enough, and they're usually not 12 inches. All right, so let's talk about chain parts. And this is, I want you guys to understand what we're trying to do with a chain. This is a little length of chain, and I'm gonna show you the chain parts. You have plates, all right? Those are the ones you can really see. You have outer plates, and then you have inner plates tucked inside there, all right? I gotta tip this up because I can't see what I'm doing. You have outer plates, inner plates, you have pins. Pins are the little circles that you can see. And then you have rollers, roller bearings in the middle. So as a chain is going through the system, the outer plates and the inner plates are not really touching much. They might touch the chain rings when they're getting moved. But for the most part, all the wear that's happening on the chain is on the rollers on the inside. That's where all the lubrication needs to be. It does not need to be on the outside of the chain where it's visible. So when you put lubrication on a chain, you are dripping it on top of each of these rollers. You're working that lubrication down underneath the roller so that they have something to lubricate them, and then you're cleaning off the outside of the chain. You do not need to have lubrication on the outside of a chain at all. All that'll do is give a place for dust or sand or debris or anything to stick to and become a nasty mess. So put lubrication on the rollers, okay? Not on the outer plates. So what I like to do is I'll do a demonstration real quick of chain lubrication here. Because there's a part.
And maybe mention the wet versus dry and the difference. Yep. That's a really common question.
All right. So when I put lube on a chain, first thing you need to do is you need to decide what kind of lube you need to use. You'll know that based on what kind of rider you are. If you're a fair weather rider, then you will never take your bicycle out when it's wet. You'll avoid puddles and anything. Then you can afford to use a dry lube. It's clean. If you're never going to get wet, then a dry lube is perfect. My preference for a dry lube is this stuff called Rock and Roll Gold. It's not terribly expensive. It's not super cheap. It does last quite a while, but it cleans the chain while you put it on, and then it's got some staying power. I really prefer that. If you're going to ride your bike in any weather, you don't care. You might get wet. You might ride through the mud. Whatever, then you need to use a wet lube. All right, a wet lube is it's gonna last longer in any kind of foul conditions. And I like to use this Pro Gold Pro Link. It's good stuff. So when I put lube on a chain, I like to stick the nozzle of the lube right on top of the chain, and then I pedal the bicycle around and I drip lube on top of the chain. All right, and try to, if you can pick the starting point and the ending point, not overlap, that's great. But if you do, it's fine too, whatever. But I dripped it right on top of every roller. And then what I'll do is I will just kind of spin the pedals around. I might shift a little bit just to kind of move that chain around. All right, and then, good. Then I'll take a rag and I will wipe it all off. This is the part that people miss. I'm going to wipe all of that excess off, and I'm going to leave only the lube inside of those rollers. And now I have a clean chain that has been properly lubed. It's not going to get all over you or everything else. It's not going to become a nasty mess. right? But it will work. So apply and then wipe off. That's how you lube a chain. All right, any questions about chain lubrication? So if you don't have any specific bike chain lubrication, I mean, there are things you can use, but they just won't be quite as effective. I mean, WD-40 is something that people use a lot, and it's not really a lubricant. It may work for a very short amount of time, like a ride or two, but then it kind of just, it flashes off. It goes away. It doesn't have any staying power. So a real bicycle chain lubricant is worth investing in. It's not a lot of money. Maybe talking $6 or $8 for a basic bottle of lube, and it'll last you for a couple years. So I encourage you to do that.
And Mark, a couple of things I want to just say, like when you are lubing your chain, being careful really not to, like, I see a lot of people squirting a lot on, and you won't want to get any chain lube on your braking surfaces.
Correct.
That would be bad. So just being careful about that. Not everyone has a bike stand at home, so you can flip your bike on its back, you know, flip it upside down, or at those fix-it stands, they have a way that you can, you know, put it up by the seat post. Another thing that Robert just asked was, do you have any guidelines for choosing and buying a new chain? I think number one, you have to know how many speeds it is, because not all chains work for,
correct,
like, but beyond that, I don't know if you have some other further guidelines, Mark.
Well, I like to stick with the manufacturer. So whatever the shifting group or manufacturer is, if it's Shimano, I prefer to use a Shimano chain with Shimano components. If I have SRAM components, SRAM, then I'll use a SRAM chain. You can use some third-party chains, and they will work, and that's fine. But like the letter K is in Kansas, KMC is a big chain manufacturer, and they have some high-quality chains that work with the various groups. But I just think you're going to get the best shifting performance with a chain that was designed to work with the components that are on your bike. So you need to know how many speeds it is, and then for every speed group, you're going to have various levels of change. You're going to have real, like, here you go. This chain here, you see these inner and outer plates are solid. And then this chain here, the inner plates have a little cut through. They're hollow. This is a higher end chain. Some chains will have hollow pins, be even higher end. It just depends on what you're going for. I mean, I don't really run the highest end chain on any of my bikes. I just don't see the value in it. I may save a couple grams by going with a super high end chain. So I usually pick, you know, not the top end and not the low end, somewhere in the middle, just for durability. So that's how.
And then Alan asked how many miles between lubes. I feel like that's always kind of a hard question too. It depends on the weather.
That's a really hard question. It depends on where you're riding. So when I look at my chain, I will generally just kind of run my finger over my chain, and if I get some oil, you know, a line of oil on my chain, let's just see what happens. That didn't work. If I get some oil on my finger, then I know my chain has some on it. If it's completely dry when I rub my finger on my chain, then I know I need to apply, if that makes any sense at all. I don't want my chain so nasty covered in oil that it just gets all over me, but I don't want it to be so dry that when I ride, you'll hear the squeaks, or it just won't shift as well if it's a dry chain. Okay. What else do we need to go into here? Okay.
I think the last bit was shifting.
Yeah, shifting. And I don't know if I want to go into the diagram of when to shift and how to shift. I just want to talk about the barrel adjusters on the derailleurs and limit screws and all that. I just want to give people some precaution here. some things. Well, I will say one thing. So this chain that I showed you guys at the beginning, that's all worn out, and it's one of its wear point, one of its parts of being so worn out is that it's like flexible sideways, which it shouldn't be. This is a chain that somebody has been riding and they've been cross-chaining a lot. And cross-chaining means that you are forcing the chain to bend sideways in the drivetrain because you're staying in one chain ring, one of the extreme chain rings. You're staying in the small chain ring, and then you're using all of the cogs in the back, and you're forcing the chain to bend. Or you can be in the big chain ring. I see this a lot. People are in the big chain ring, but they want to go up a hill, so they put it into their big cog in the back, right? We call that big. And you're forcing the chain to bend. You're forcing the chain to start here and then go way out here, and it's not meant to do that. So another way you can prolong the life of your chain is if you can keep a straighter chain line. So don't keep it in the extremes. Don't cross chain it. If you have a triple chain ring like this, I'd run it in the middle chain ring and then use my gears. Or if I'm going to put it in the big chain ring to go fast on a flat, then I would only use, you know, kind of the smaller cogs here, straight chain line. If I need to get into an easier gear, I would probably drop it into a smaller chain ring and just keep my chain lines straight. So that'll help prolong the length, the life of your chain quite a bit. Is to keep a straighter chain line. Okay,
yeah, that's a common question that people ask, is like how many miles on a chain, which, I mean, it kind of depends on how you ride.
Couple thousand maybe, if you're taking care of it. Yeah, I think you can get a couple thousand miles out of a chain easily if you take care of it and don't cross chain it and keep it lubed and all that. It's hard. That's a number. I just can't, you know, it's like how many miles do you get out of a tire? I don't really know. It depends. You just got to stay on top of it. And if you take care of it, it should last you longer than if you didn't take care of it. Let's talk about derailleurs and shifting adjustments. This is one thing that catches a lot of people when they start to want to do some of their own maintenance. There's a pitfall here that I want to prevent you guys from finding. I'm going to show you some derailleurs. This here is a front derailleur. We call it a clamp-on style front derailleur. It actually clamps around the seat tube. Front derailleur. Here's another clamp-on style front derailleur. Slightly different setup. The clamp is a lower clamp, so it's more of a mountain bike style. Anyway, rear derailleurs. This is a rear derailleur. Got this long cage here with jockey pulleys. If you can see, these are the jockey pulleys here, top and bottom jockey pulley. Here's another style of a rear derailleur. It's a road bike style rear derailleur, short cage, but it's still same basic setup, jockey pulleys. What you're going to see when you go to do some adjustments on a derailleur, the first thing you see when you look at it is what catches people in a bad way here. First thing you see are going to be these two Phillips head screw right here, right? These are called the limit screws, all right? They're generally labeled with an H or an L. This one actually says, I think, high or low, right next to the limit screws. These screws should only be adjusted when the bike is initially set up. These are not adjustment screws for if you're having poor shifting performance. So I like to refer to these as the off-limit screws. Do not touch the limit screws unless you know exactly what you're doing. And it's a shame because people that have Phillips screwdrivers, they're like, well, something's not right, so they just start twisting these, and then they get themselves into a bad place, all right? if you have poor shifting and you're shifting your bike, but the chain's just not doing what you're expecting it to do, most of the adjustment can be done on the rear derailleur using this right here, the barrel adjuster. Same thing that was on your brake lever. If you twist it, all right, it will, I think you guys can see this little silver part is going to start coming out. If I start twisting this, get my fat fingers out of the way, a little silver part comes out, and that's how you make shifting adjustments. Okay, so it is not done with the limit screws. These rear derailleurs have limit screws also. They're on the back side, marked with an H or an L. All right, and they should be set at the time the bicycle is set up. It's not a shifting performance adjustment. So, get this where we can see it. Let's see if I can line that up. There we go. So, rear derailleur has this barrel adjuster. If I am pedaling the bicycle, and if you guys can hear that, it sounds pretty good, nice little click to it. But I'm going to take it out of adjustment here. Now you can hear all kinds of sounds that shouldn't be existing. Okay, and if you could see this up close, you would see that the chain is rubbing up against the cog next to it on the inside. It's rubbing up against this slightly bigger cog, and that's what's causing the noise, is the chain rubbing up against that cog. The chain should live and it should ride exactly in the middle of the two cogs that are next to it. So the way you want to do that is if you can look at the chain, if you can get behind the bike and look at it, and you can see that it's rubbing up against this bigger cog, then you want to move the chain outboard. So what you would do is you would take your barrel adjuster and you would twist it the direction you want it to go. So I'm going to twist it outboard. And as I turn and I twist this barrel adjuster, the sound disappears and it now becomes quiet. And you want to check your shifting and see if it's shifting the way you want it to. It works. So that is how you make shifting adjustments. It's with your barrel adjuster. The idea is you want to turn the barrel adjuster the direction that you want the chain to move. And you know which way you want the chain to move by observing and looking at the chain and trying to get it right in the middle of the cogs to the inboard and to the outboard of the chain. Does anybody have any questions about that? I don't know how else to explain that.
I would also jump in. I think when doing any type of adjustments with your derailleurs, I mean, we talked about the limit screws or off-limit screws. Even with the barrel adjuster, it's really common for people to just really tighten something or really loosen something. And everything with bikes, I mean, start with like a quarter a turn or half a turn and kind of slowly make any adjustments. Because when you just really loosen something or really tighten something, lots of times you're just, it's just unneeded, and then you're recreating, like making bigger problems in some ways. Yeah. So moving slowly sometimes can really help.
Yeah, a little at a time. Less is more sometimes. Yeah.
I'm not seeing any questions about that. So I just wondered that there's barrel adjusters lots of times on other parts of your bike too, like by your shifters.
That's true. Sometimes your shifters.
But I feel like it's usually easier to do it when it's back by the derailleur because of that analogy or the comparison you made or about it.
Right.
The direction you want it to go.
When you get to understand barrel adjusters and how they work, and you understand what you're trying to accomplish, if you have a mountain bike with flat bars and there may be a barrel adjuster at the shifter, then you can make on-the-fly adjustments because you'll know what you're doing. But I like for people to start with the rear derailleur and look at it, get behind the bike, look at the chain, see the chain being where you want it to be, not rubbing up against the cog that it's not on, and then adjusting that barrel outboard or inboard based on where you want to move the chain to.
And Michael just asked, the shifting is only funky on a few of the cogs. Does that designate a worn cog? I would say most often it's probably, I mean, you can replace, you start with like the cheapest thing first. Like I would maybe try replacing the cable or moving the cable. But
yeah,
you know, normally
I would start with first of all, make sure your chain is properly lubricated. A dry chain will not shift very well. Then you start with the cables. It's exactly right. You'll make sure your cables are good or your housing is good. Sometimes a rusted or corroded cable inside of the housing, it won't slide inside of the housing like it should. And it'll cause it to bind up and not let the derailleur move. The derailleur just works on springs, right? So that's hard to demonstrate without you seeing it. So it only has so much spring tension. If there's resistance in the cable and housing, not allowing that spring to relax like it needs to, it'll get kind of hung up and it'll get stuck in a place that it shouldn't be. And that could be because of corroded cables and housing. Or a bent cable, you know, you could kink your cable because you caught it somewhere, you know, on something. Yeah, that could be one of the problems for poor shifting just in a few of the cogs.
Yeah, it's all about eliminating variables, but you wouldn't, first step would be going out and replacing cog. I mean, you'd want to do a couple of things.
And the only other reason I can think of why it would shift good in some cogs and not others is that we've all done, well, is you put the wrong cassette on the bike and you have like a 7-speed shifter and you put an 8-speed cog on the bike, it'll shift great in the high and in the very low, but it won't shift in the middle very well.
That's true.
But I doubt that the average person is doing that, you know. But yeah, that could be a problem, the wrong number of gears for the shifter.
So it's about 1:20. I'm going to go ahead and send the exit poll for some people that need to get going, but this would be a time if you have more specific questions about your bike, or maybe if you want us to go, like, we didn't quite get to something, we can hang around to get to some of those questions. If we really need to get into it, we can even like unmute you, or if you have your bike with you, you can even like show us like what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm happy to go deep dive into anything you guys want to deep dive into.
I would also say, while people are maybe thinking about that or typing their stuff, go ahead and check out the Q&A section. And if you go to like the answered section, you can see what other questions people asked. A lot of it was just about like what tools, and then also this is going to be recorded, you guys, too. So we have some questions coming in. Oh yes, is this recording be posted online? We will, we can email it to you guys. So, and also include this PowerPoint presentation that has like an exploded bicycle diagram, do and don't things, kind of that are explained on the bike. So don't worry. Okay. Daryl says, if I had the tweeting noise in my pedal, which lubricant would you recommend? Oh, okay. I mean, you could just use, I would use any lubricant.
Yeah, I mean, if you had just a squeaking noise in your pedal, you need something that will kind of penetrate a little bit. You know, there are bearings inside of the pedal, so you don't want to spray something in there that's going to take the lubrication out of it. But I guess I wouldn't be too afraid of hitting that with just a shot of WD-40, because it does kind of penetrate well, and it will break down any kind of gunk that's in there, or a very lightweight kind of 3-in-1 oil might be the way to do that. Also, take the pedal off and just kind of drip some lightweight oil that'll kind of penetrate.
Another question, and this is Cindy and I emailed ahead of time. There's a brake about not being able to get the V brake pads to hit the rim at the same time. And I don't know if you went into that through. There's like these, I don't know if you could demonstrate that maybe even just on one side of a V brake, how you can adjust, make them be equally bouncy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let's see what my best method to demonstrate that is. Let me see if I can get this thing closer so I can get a good angle on it. So I was trying to show that, but it's so difficult to show. Okay, so here is my V-brake set up on here, and I'm only going to show you from the side, okay? I can't really show you head on. But if I was going to try to get my pads to line up correctly, I'm going to squeeze the brake caliper. You can see that the brakes are working. I'm going to hold it kind of tight, and I'm going to, generally it's a 5 millimeter, I'm going to loosen up that pad post, and I'm going to release a little bit of the tension. All right, so it allows me to kind of wiggle the pad a little bit, and I'm going to get it flat against the rim, and I'm going to squeeze my brake lever again, and now I'm going to hold it tight, and then re-tighten that. Okay, just snug, and then engage it. See if that did what you need to do. You can still kind of tweak it just a little bit. And when you get that where you're comfortable where it's lined up and flat, then you can kind of snug up that post a little bit. It may twist a little bit on you when you're snugging it up, so you may have to play with it just a hair. But that's how you do that. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to allow these conical washers to kind of find their home again. Man, I really can't show this very well. This washer is kind of dome shaped, all right? And then this washer is kind of like bowl shaped. And you want the dome to find its angle in the bowl. And that allows you to adjust the angle of the pad. So sometimes when pads are just, they're a little cockeyed, you need to loosen them all up and kind of wiggle it a little bit to let all these little washers find their happy place. And then you can tighten it back up. Does that make sense? The one real cool thing about those type of post style pads is they really do afford you quite a bit of flexibility and adjustment in angle. And then if it's just one arm that's moving more than another, that's where I was saying that you can adjust these little springs to get one arm to get the arms to equally spring. And sometimes less is more there also. Instead of dialing one spring all the way in, back out the other spring and release a little bit of that spring tension.
Cindy, does that help? Yeah, I was just I feel like once you get those pads set, with that side-to-side thing, it really is just lots of times like a quarter of a turn of one of those springs. Philip said that'll make it just hit it evenly, or letting a little of that tension off, like a quarter of a turn can make.
Yeah, just a little bit at a time.
I'm not seeing any other questions. We had to ask if we do a more advanced hands-on. Cindy says, spring notes move enough. Thanks for the ideas. Cool. Yeah, play with it. I mean, that really is the best way to kind of get a sense of how it works. And like I said, little adjustment. Depending on how old it is too, if it's like rusty in there, sometimes I'll just put a tiny bit of chain oil, like a tiny dollop on those springs, because sometimes the spring is seized.
Yeah. That's a good point. Some of the bikes that we work on, they're donated to us, and they may not have been ridden for a long time. Sometimes I'll take this brake arm completely off and put some grease underneath the post to give it some, to allow it to kind of twist, because it might just be binding up here on the post. The post might be a little rusted. So there could be that. There could be multiple reasons why this doesn't spring very well, but start with the spring tension and then maybe just clean up the whole system and hit it with just a little bit of lube. Any kind of lube in that situation is fine.
Also, depending on what era of mountain bike, it's kind of common for those things, the plastic casing to crack and break, and then that makes the spring not work. So, I mean, there are kind of without seeing it, but if you are looking and it looks like the casing around it is broken, like it's cracked, then you'd have to replace it. You'd have to replace the spring.
Yeah.
No level of adjusting your side-to-side screws will help you then. So we still have 8 people who are in for the long haul, but no questions coming in. So let's.
You know what I didn't talk about, and I didn't want to take too much time on it, is my skewers, my little skewer speech. If people are still on here and they're willing to give me my soapbox for a little bit, I'm just going to show you skewers. This is something that I see people get hung up on. If you have a bicycle that has skewers on that hold your wheels in, there is a front and a rear. Front is the shorter skewer, the rear is the longer skewer, and those are examples of complete skewers. You'll see that on this skewer, you have the lever end, right? And I don't know if you can see that. When I'm moving the lever, that cap moves in, okay? You have 2 springs. The springs are shaped like a cone. There's a very narrow part, and then there's a fat part on the end. The narrow parts point in at each other. The fat parts fit inside of the end caps. So if you take a skewer apart and you drop your springs, when you reassemble it, please make sure you put the skinny part of the spring first. All right, I'll put it on an actual wheel. You're gonna put it in. You're gonna take your skinny part of your spring, stick it on. The fat part will then go inside of the skewer end. Skinny part of the spring is what rests up against the axle, okay? That's how that works. Now, if you lose one of these springs, not a big deal. It's not an essential part. It's just there for convenience to center your skewer on the axle. That's all. That's the only thing that works. But if you were to take that spring and put it on backwards, fat end first, which is very easy to do, and I've seen it millions of times, that fat end will cover your axle. And then when you put that wheel in your bike, now this axle is thicker than this axle over here, so your wheel will sit in there. It'll sit cockeyed in your fork or in your rear dropout. And that's just because that spring is now adding material to your axle. So very important if you take your skewer apart to make sure that spring goes on properly. Now, to use a quick release, you want to close the lever to tighten it. You do not want to just continue to spin the lever to tighten it onto the bike. That is not how you tighten this quick release skewer. You must use the lever to close it to tighten it. Okay? All right, that's my quick release speech.
And I see that so often, like outside of, every time I see that, it's like one of the most common things I see, and it's really dangerous that have that like closed properly. So William, I think, who also had reached out to us before this, I didn't know how to mount his bike to an indoor trainer. And I asked what kind it is because I know some are a little different. But I don't know if you can give a little quick 101 on that.
So you have just a typical friction style trainer that the rear wheel is rubbing up against some sort of a drum, and it locks into your rear axle. Is that correct?
I can. Yeah, he says yes. I can. Do you want easier to unmute you?
Yeah, go ahead and unmute him. We can talk.
Yeah. I think some people don't have the. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if it's letting me. Oh yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay. So are you curious on what to do with the front wheel, or how to do the rear wheel?
Yeah, how to mount the front. I'm having trouble with it. I don't know if I can send you a video or a picture of the indoor trainer. I just got it off the Amazon like everybody else, and it seems to have some sort of a...
So my experience with, and I've used multiple different trainers. I have old style trainers where you mount your rear axle, tire, the wheel and the tire is still on the bike, and the tire is generating friction against that roller.
Right.
And then my front wheel, I would leave the front wheel in and use, I don't know, some sort of just a riser block or just a piece of wood or something just to make the bike level again. I have seen trainers where they're going to lock in the front wheel into a stand, and it actually like raises and lowers the front of the bike.
Yeah, I bought this one because that's the type. It doesn't need to remove the wheel, but because of the quick release, it won't fit inside of the two lug nuts on the side. So I'm trying to flip out or switch out the front skewer, but I don't know why it's not working.
So if you have an old like locking front wheel that has nuts, it's a nutted kind of a bolt-on front wheel. Not all of those will have a hollow. You can't run a skewer through it because it's not a hollow axle.
Okay.
That would be the problem. I don't have an example of. So this front wheel has a hollow axle, right? You're never going to be able to get that line up so you can see all the way through it. An older like bolt-on wheel will have a solid axle, so you'll never be able to get a skewer all the way through. And then maybe your bolt-ons are too thick to drop into that front mount, which could be the problem. What size wheel is it?
I don't think it's a standard. I mean, I haven't gotten a new bike in a while, so it's just a regular quick release front.
Okay.
I went to a bike shop. I tried to get a replacement or a non-quick release, but it seems like I bought the wrong kind of trainer indoors because I don't see there's a way to alter the trainer. So it basically has like just two, they look like lug nuts on each side, and it's just supposed to encase the front wheel, but it obviously won't work with a quick release.
But it's for the front wheel, not for the rear wheel. How does the rear wheel bolt in?
It doesn't. It's just on a little magnetic. You can adjust the resistance, the flywheel.
Okay. Can you? You said you got it on Amazon?
Yeah, I got it a while ago.
What's it called?
Shoot. We've got probably a couple hundred things on Amazon lately, so.
So it is
it's an indoor trainer. It wasn't the most expensive. It was probably like one of the, like an add-on I thought I needed it item, so I just got it and then didn't get to unbox it for quite a while, so it's kind of sat there.
Okay, but it has a front wheel mount.
Right, like two lug nuts basically on the side, and then just kind of you twist them down to encapsulate the front hub.
Huh.
Hang on a second.
Is
Does
it
it look like
green?
that?
No, not really. It's
Okay, so
probably
it's not that. Because a standard, you know, when I think of an indoor trainer, I think of, you know, something that looks like that, right?
yeah. Except
Um,
for this one, the triangle part is black, and it does look like that, the mechanism to hold it. But the rear wheel has that, yeah, that little spinny thing. And so the rear wheel just keeps spinning.
Interesting. So that's that. You know, that type of trainer, similar to that, you'd put your rear wheel in there, and then your front wheel would just sit in a what we'd call like a riser block, or I mean, just for picture purposes, you know, your front wheel just kind of sits on a something that lifts it up and makes it the same level as
Right,
the rear
gotcha.
wheel. Then, so that's a typical bike trainer, and you really just leave the front wheel alone, and you just stick it up in a riser block or a phone book or a piece of wood. I've never seen, or I can't
Oh,
think of
wait.
what.
You know what? I had this backwards. You're right. This is that way too. It's just in a triangle position. It's like in a
Okay,
different set. So you're right. The rear wheel is the hub that needs to be locked in.
that's correct. Yes. Now, depending on what your bicycle has as far as a hub situation and a skewer situation, this skewer that I was using as a demonstration, this is pretty much exactly the skewer you need for a typical bike trainer. It's steel. It's got a kind of a rounded end, both sides. So this will mount in. Hang on a second. I have a trainer sitting right here. So here is a Blackburn trainer that I had sitting here. And this skewer will fit into one end. Probably fits into that end better. And then I've never used this, so please bear with me. Never used this one. I don't know how it works.
Are there different trainers for mountain bikes versus like a hybrid or a city bike?
Yeah, so depending on what kind of axles you have, so your old standard quick release kind of axle like this, trainers were trainers. It was, you know, pretty much all of them worked. Newer bikes now are getting like through axles, which are thicker, which needs a different kind of trainer. The ends need to be different.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think I got the wrong trainer
Yeah.
for the mountain bike. I got it.
Right. So if you've got a mountain bike, like a fairly recent mountain bike, it probably has a through axle, and that through axle will not work with this style mount on a trainer at all.
Yeah, I think that's the problem.
Yeah. So to be honest, so I had the same situation with my mountain bike, which is why I got a trainer that was like that fork mounted trainer. I'm just going to see if I can find that picture again. So I have a trainer that's kind of similar to that, where you mount the front fork through axle, and then the rear wheel is on rollers. So you don't have to engage the rear axle in any kind of mount. So if I have a through axle system, it works. This is the type of trainer I use. Now it's hard to get resistance on these. It's just friction on those rollers is all you're getting. But I had to go to something like this for my mountain bike.
Aren't rollers also kind of different for like the balance on them is a little bit it's more like a road feeling or something. I've heard people.
Well, it's kind of, yeah, I mean, and these rollers are not your typical set of rollers where you'd have that front roller also where you really have to focus on balance. This you are locked in, but it is just kind of like, it's just like road feel resistant. That's correct. I mean, I'm sure that there are trainers out there that will accept a through axle. I'm just not familiar with them right off. But yeah, you would have to know what size through axle you have and probably what frame. It's just because the through axle doesn't come through the frame. You know, it's only proud of the frame on one side where the handle is. The other side is just a nut built into that frame drop out. There's nothing to hold on to it.
Right.
Yeah, that's your problem. Right. Yeesh. Yeah, I don't know how to direct you to the solution to that problem right off. I think some more research into trainers for through axle mountain bike.
Right. I'm going to ask you really quickly, any trouble or any issues you had with the front mount solution that you're talking, just buying a new trainer? That sounds like the easiest solution.
No, I haven't had. I'm trying to see if I have that thing sitting here. It's somewhere around here. I bought one. It's similar to this Duder. It's similar to that, but mine is made by Feedback Sports. And it comes with different through axle adapters, so I can use it on a 12 mil through axle or a 15 mil through axle, or I can use it on a standard quick release. It's got a lot of flexibility. I really like it for my mountain bike.
Cool. Any chance you can post that in the chat? I got to go soon, but I would be able to look it up.
Yeah. Feedback Sports Podium, I think is what it's called, if I can remember correctly. Podium trainer?
Feedback Sports Podium?
Yeah, no, it's not the Podium. The Feedback Sports Trainer. Yeah, we'll find that Feedback Sports Trainer.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. Very helpful.
It looks like that. It's got that triangle that supports the front wheels, and then it has the front wheel and then the two rollers in the back. It's adjustable for length, for different length bikes. Feedback Sports.
Yeah, this might be
Omnium. I'm sorry, it's called the Omnium Trainer.
Omnium, got it.
Omnium Trainer.
Yeah, I was going to say it might be too specific, but I had a older specialized mountain bike from, I don't know, like the late 90s, and I've been just keeping them because they don't make them that well anymore. No.
It's worth keeping that. 26-inch wheels.
Right.
Probably. Yeah. Is it like a hard rock or a
stump jumper frame, something like that, right?
Stump jumper. Yeah, it's an old stumpy. Okay.
Classic.
Yeah. Save that. That's why I have my old Paramount here. I love the 26. Just they don't make them like that anymore.
No, they sure don't.
No.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. That's really helpful.
Yes, sir.
All right, Brandon, we work with. Cindy, do you have any other? Or Brandon, not to dismiss you. Do you have any questions or specific things you'd like for us to get into? Okay, Brandon's just chilling. I didn't want to just assume you were just chilling.
Oh, Shuby's here? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Shuby.
Shuby, you should help us with background music for the intro.
Yeah. We need you in the background. We'll turn your microphone on. You could just be back there doing something.
Oh man, yeah, we'll up our game. Cindy, do you have any other questions or issues? Cool. Okay.
And you had a lot of people chatting. That's great.
I'm good. You had some nice questions. Also, Cindy, I was going to remember this too. If tool videos has good like instructional stuff, but like I really like our mountain bike or road bike maintenance as far as like instruction books, or the Sheldon Brown website who has good stuff for further research. But cool. Well, all right, we're gonna kick you guys out because I gotta eat. And but thank you so much for chilling and learning. And I'm gonna call it.
All right. I'm going to sign out. I'm going to go bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Have a good day.